36-year-old Mark Boyce was bashed to death near his home at Elizabeth South in January 2017. Hells Angels bikie 34-year-old Toby Salsdorfer was today found guilty of murder alongside fellow club member Joshua Grant, who was tried and sentenced in 2019.
The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, HAMC, is an international outlaw motorcycle club known for its members riding Harley-Davidson motorcycles. HAMC's reputation has often been clouded by criminal activity linked to certain individuals. One of the darkest incidents to emerge from the culture surrounding outlaw motorcycle clubs is the tragic murder of Mark Boyce, an innocent bystander who became an unintended victim of a brutal attack carried out by members associated with the Hells Angels. This case exposes not only the brutality that can stem from conflicts involving these groups, but also raises critical questions about society's and the legal system's response to such violent crimes. On the evening of January 30th, 2017, Mark Boyce, a 36-year-old man from Gulf View Heights, South Australia, stepped out of his home, unaware that he would soon face a horrifying and fatal encounter. He was preparing for a casual motorcycle ride with his longtime friend, Sam Perkins, a night that should have been uneventful. Unbeknownst to Boyce, the danger was closing in. Sensing something was off, Perkins had taken refuge on the roof of Boyce's house, fully aware that the Hells Angels members were looking for him. Perkins was the target of a manhunt by members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. However, fate cruelly intervened when the club members mistook Boyce for Perkins. That night, roaring engines filled the neighborhood as two vehicles approached Boyce's home, a small dark car and a larger light-colored one. Inside these vehicles were Hells Angels members, menacing figures known for their involvement in violent confrontations. As Boyce stood outside, unaware of the imminent threat, three men, including Tobias Sofer, emerged from the vehicles. Sofer, a prominent member of the Hells Angels with a history of violence, led the group. His imposing presence, covered in tattoos symbolizing his allegiance to the motorcycle club, set the tone for the brutal attack that was about to unfold. Along with Joshua Roy Grant, another associate, Sofer and his crew advanced toward Boyce, intent on settling a score. What followed was a vicious assault, all captured on CCTV footage. Although the footage was of poor quality, it showed Boyce trying to escape as Sofer chased him down the street. Despite his size, Sofer moved quickly and relentlessly, leaving Boyce no chance to defend himself. Within moments, the attackers closed in on Boyce, raining down a barrage of punches and kicks, showing no mercy. The brutality of the assault was captured on camera. Boyce, a man with no ties to the club or the conflict, was left defenseless on the pavement. Fueled by their misguided quest for vengeance, Sofer and his accomplices showed no restraint. Boyce collapsed under the relentless attack, and his injuries were catastrophic. As the attackers fled the scene, Boyce was left for dead. Justice Laura Stein, who presided over the subsequent trial, later described the attack as brutal and unnecessary. Her condemnation reflected the outrage of a community left shattered by the senseless loss of an innocent life. Boyce, who had never provoked his attackers, became the tragic victim of a vendetta he had no part in. Mark Boyce was rushed to the hospital and fought for his life for over a week. However, on February 8, 2017, he succumbed to his injuries, leaving his family and friends devastated. His death not only highlighted the destructive consequences of violence linked to outlaw motorcycle clubs, but also marked a tragic loss for those who loved him. Sofer's association with the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, HAMC, was unmistakable. His body was covered in tattoos, many symbolizing his loyalty to the club. During the trial, his imposing stature and cold demeanor further cemented his reputation as dangerous. Sofer's criminal history was extensive. He had been involved in several violent incidents before the attack on Mark Boyce, but this time, his actions proved fatal. Despite overwhelming evidence, including CCTV footage, Sofer remained defiant throughout the trial. His lack of remorse was chilling, making it clear that he had no intention of apologizing for his actions. However, Sofer did not act alone. Joshua Roy Grant, another associate of the Hells Angels, played a key role in the attack. While not as physically intimidating as Sofer, Grant was equally dangerous. His part in the assault was to restrain Boyce while Sofer delivered the fatal blows. Together, they ensured Boyce had no chance to escape or defend himself. The legal proceedings following Mark Boyce's murder were drawn out over months as the Supreme Court sought to uncover the brutal details of the crime. This case was not merely an isolated incident, but a grim reflection of the broader issue of violence linked to outlaw motorcycle clubs in South Australia. The trial of Sofer and Grant exposed the public to the dark underworld of these clubs and the complex legal challenges involved in bringing their members to justice. The murder trial was one of the most anticipated cases in the region, driven by public interest due to the horrific nature of the crime and the involvement of the notorious Hells Angels motorcycle club. This case was not solely about the tragic death of Mark Boyce, an innocent man in the wrong place at the wrong time, but also about the state's capacity to hold individuals from organized crime syndicates accountable, particularly outlaw motorcycle clubs. From the outset, the prosecution faced the challenging task of reconstructing the events leading to Boyce's brutal murder. Although part of the attack was captured on CCTV footage, the poor quality of the video offered only a fragmented view. Prosecutors depended heavily on forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and video surveillance to build a solid case and form a clear crime timeline. Central to the prosecution's case was the footage itself. The CCTV captured Mark Boyce's attempt to escape as Tobias Sofer, backed by his associates, cornered him outside his home in Gulfview Heights. The video, though unclear at points, showed the relentless nature of the attack. Boyce was overwhelmed in a matter of seconds by punches and kicks, leaving him defenseless. The prosecution argued that the violence unleashed on Boyce was not only excessive, but far beyond what could ever be considered a simple assault. The nature of the attack, they contended, pointed to an intent to cause serious harm, if not death. Forensic evidence further strengthened the case. Medical reports outlined Boyce's horrific injuries, which included multiple fractures, head trauma, and internal bleeding. Expert testimony confirmed that the force of the blows delivered by Sofer and his accomplice Grant was sufficient to cause fatal damage, even if killing Boyce had not been their immediate goal. This evidence was pivotal in countering the defense's claims that the attack was not premeditated. The prosecution also presented evidence of Sofer's and Grant's affiliation with the Hells Angels motorcycle club, suggesting that their membership influenced their violent tendencies. By exposing the club's history of violent crime, drug trafficking, and extortion, the prosecution argued that Sofer and Grant had been conditioned by the club's culture to use extreme violence as a way to assert dominance and instill fear. The Hells Angels were portrayed as more than a group of motorcycle enthusiasts, rather, a highly organized international criminal enterprise with a reputation for brutality. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, the defense teams of Tobias Sofer and Joshua Roy Grant worked tirelessly to reduce their client's culpability. They argued that, although the attack on Mark Boyce was undeniably vicious, it was not premeditated. The defense claimed that the two men had gone to Boyce's home not intending to kill, but to confront Sam Perkins, a friend of Boyce's who had eluded them earlier in the evening. The defense team in the trial of Sofer and Grant focused on portraying the assault that led to the death of Mark Boyce as a spontaneous act of violence rather than a calculated, premeditated murder. Their strategy hinged on the argument that both men were acting out of frustration after failing to locate their intended target, Perkins, and that their aggression toward Boyce was the result of mounting tension rather than a deliberate plan to kill. This narrative aimed to humanize Sofer and Grant, suggesting they were not cold-blooded killers, but individuals caught up in a moment of rage and desperation. By emphasizing the heat-of-the-moment nature of the attack, the defense sought to undermine the prosecution's claim of premeditated murder. They painted a picture of Sofer and Grant as men who, while undoubtedly violent, had not entered the situation with the intent to kill Boyce. Instead, the assault was portrayed as a tragic result of a misdirected outburst of anger. This emotional and impulsive reaction, according to the defense, meant that the actions of Sofer and Grant should be seen in a different light, one that justified reducing the charges from murder to manslaughter. The defense also pointed to the chaotic events leading up to the attack, arguing that the disarray and failure to locate Perkins had escalated the tension. In this heightened emotional state, they claimed, Sofer and Grant acted recklessly but without the intention to kill. This argument was crucial to their goal of securing a lesser conviction, hoping that the jury would sympathize with the idea that the attack was more an uncontrolled emotional response than a calculated crime. Additionally, the defense tried to separate Sofer and Grant from the broader activities of the Hells Angels, asserting that the two men were not acting on behalf of the club during the attack. This distinction was crucial in their argument, aiming to portray the assault as an isolated, personal conflict rather than an act of violence tied to any organized criminal activity associated with the club. However, the prosecution's evidence significantly undermined the defense's narrative. CCTV footage, forensic reports, and witness testimonies all suggested a level of violence that was both excessive and deliberate. The prosecution also emphasized the connection between Sofer and Grant's actions and the broader culture of the Hells Angels, reinforcing the notion that their behavior aligned with the club's history of violence and intimidation. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and deliberations, the jury returned its verdict. Sofer and Grant were found guilty of the murder of Mark Boyce. For Boyce's family, the verdict was a long-awaited relief, marking the end of a painful legal process. It was also a significant win for the prosecution and law enforcement, who had worked to curb violence linked to outlaw motorcycle clubs. During sentencing, both Sofer and Grant received life sentences. Sofer was handed a non-parole period of 23 years, while Grant received 20 years. Justice Laura Stein, who presided over the case, highlighted the importance of severe penalties in such cases. She noted that, while the men may not have set out with the intent to kill, the level of brutality in their actions was unjustifiable. Justice Stein's words underscored the need to protect the community from individuals who, like Sofer and Grant, posed a grave threat to public safety. The trial of Sofer and Grant brought attention to the broader issue of outlaw motorcycle club violence in South Australia. The state has long struggled with the criminal activities of groups such as the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, HAMC, the Mongols, and the Rebels, outlaw motorcycle clubs, OMCs, involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and violent assaults. These organizations operated with relative impunity for years, using intimidation and force to maintain control over their territories. In recent years, however, the South Australian government and law enforcement agencies have intensified efforts to reduce the influence of these clubs. South Australia's legal framework for handling OMCs is among the strictest in the country, with laws specifically designed to target these organizations. For instance, anti-association laws prohibit known members from gathering publicly, and anti-fortification laws allow the police to dismantle heavily fortified clubhouses used by these clubs. The severity of the sentences handed to Sofer and Grant reflected the state's commitment to cracking down on motorcycle club violence. The trial served as a clear signal that the legal system was prepared to take a firm stance against individuals associated with outlaw motorcycle clubs, and that violent crimes by members of such organizations would not be treated lightly. Furthermore, the public nature of the trial sent a powerful message to other members of OMCs. South Australia's judicial system would no longer tolerate the lawlessness that had been allowed to thrive in the past. The sentences were not only about punishing Sofer and Grant, but also about warning others who might be tempted to engage in similar violent activities. The future of OMCs depends largely on how governments and law enforcement agencies continue to address their presence. Many countries, including Australia, have recognized the need for proactive measures to curb these clubs. One key step is the strengthening of laws targeting their operations. Anti-association laws, which make it illegal for members to gather, have proven effective in disrupting their activities, while anti-fortification laws prevent clubs from operating in heavily secured locations. Increased police presence and specialized units focusing on club-related crimes are also essential. Equipped with advanced surveillance and intelligence capabilities, these units can track the movements and activities of club members, leading to more arrests and convictions. In Australia, task forces have successfully dismantled outlaw motorcycle club networks. Dismantling the financial structures that support these clubs is critical. Freezing assets, seizing illegally obtained property, and cutting off the flow of money are key in crippling their operations. International cooperation is also vital, as many OMCs operate across borders, requiring countries to collaborate in tracking and apprehending club leaders. The community was no longer willing to ignore the presence of these clubs, often seen as a shadowy yet tolerated part of society. Boyce's murder highlighted the violent reality of their activities, turning public opinion sharply against them. Many residents began calling for stricter laws and increased police presence, demanding that the government take immediate action to curb the criminal activities of OMCs. This outcry was fueled not just by fear for personal safety, but also by a sense of frustration that these clubs had been able to operate with relative impunity for so long. Businesses in the area also felt the impact. Local establishments, particularly those near known club hangouts, reported declining customer traffic as people became wary of potential violence. Some businesses even closed down, unable to sustain operations amid the increasing tension. Community events and gatherings saw reduced attendance, as residents preferred to stay indoors rather than risk being caught in the crossfire of escalating gang-related violence. For many, the murder of Boyce was not just an isolated tragedy, but a symbol of the broader issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. It sparked renewed debates about the role of law enforcement and the effectiveness of existing legislation aimed at controlling OMCs. The community's demand for change also pressured politicians to prioritize public safety and introduce tougher measures against these outlaw motorcycle clubs. With sustained efforts, the future may see a significant reduction in the influence of outlaw motorcycle clubs, helping restore safety and peace in affected communities.